The Ardennes forest stretched like a tangled shroud under the December sky, its pines heavy with frost and a winter bite that seeped into bones no matter how tightly wool coats were buttoned. Private Eddie Harlan crouched behind a snow-dusted log, his breath fogging the air as he fiddled with the dials on the SCR 536 handheld radio strapped to his chest. The device was a brick of bakelite and wires, but it hummed to life with a crackle that sliced through the muffled quiet like a secret whispered in the dark. Eddie was 22, from a dusty Iowa farm, his lanky build making him look younger than his years, and a cautious streak keeping him alive longer than most. He wasn't the bravest in the platoon, but he was steady, the kind who checked his rifle twice before dawn patrol. Sergeant Roy Kessler slid down beside him, his face etched with lines from too many nights like this. Roy was the anchor, broad-shouldered and gruff, his Brooklyn accent thickening under stress. He'd seen Normandy, Sicily, the bloody march across France, carrying the weight in his dark, watchful eyes that never quite trusted the calm. "What's the word from command, kid?" he muttered, peering through the underbrush where German lines lurked just beyond the ridge. The Battle of the Bulge had erupted a week ago, Hitler's last gamble, and their company was pinned in this frozen hell, outnumbered and outgunned by panzers prowling the fog like ghosts. Eddie pressed the talk button, his gloved finger careful not to snag. "This is Foxtrot 2, requesting sitrep on resupply. Over." Static hissed back first, then a voice from Battalion HQ crackled through, clear as if from the next foxhole. "Foxtrot 2, resupply ETA 0500. Hold position. Artillery barrage incoming at 0200 to soften Kraut defenses. Confirm, over." Eddie relayed it to Roy with a nod, the radio's glow casting faint green light on his stubbled chin. These gadgets kept them one step ahead, the walkie-talkies linking every squad, every man, turning chaos into coordination. Back in training, the brass had drilled it. Radios were the edge, the invisible thread binding the line. Roy grunted, wiping sleet from his helmet. "Artillery, huh? Better hope it doesn't turn us into Swiss cheese." He scanned the tree line, where shadows shifted unnaturally. Their platoon, 30 men whittled to 15 by the initial assault, had dug in here after a frantic retreat from Elsenborn. The external threat was the Panzer Division probing their flank, Tigers rumbling through the snow, their 88mm guns capable of punching through anything short of a mountain. Ammo was low, fuel for the jeeps scarcer still, and the cold sapped what little warmth remained. One wrong move, and the whole line could crumble, stranding them in no man's land with Jerry closing in. Corporal Lena Vasquez, the platoon's medic and the only woman in their ragged unit, assigned after the medics took shrapnel at Bastogne, crawled up from the rear, her medic bag slung over one shoulder. She was wiry, quick with a scalpel and quicker with sarcasm, her dark hair tucked under a scarf that did little against the wind. Born in Texas to Mexican immigrants, she'd enlisted to prove something to herself, and her hands never shook, not even under fire. "You two gossiping again? I've got frostbite checks to do before we all lose our toes." She handed Eddie a strip of jerky from her rations, her eyes flicking to the radio. "That thing saving our asses yet?" Eddie chewed slowly, the salt a brief fire against the chill. "Every damn minute. Battalion's got eyes on the whole front now. No more guessing where the shells are falling." It was true. The radios had changed everything since D-Day. No more runners picked off by snipers. No more blind charges into machine gun nests. But Roy shook his head, his voice low. "Don't get cocky. Krauts are clever. If they figure out we're wired up like a switchboard, they'll start jamming or hunting the signals. The first plan was simple. Hold the ridge until resupply, then push back with artillery cover." Roy outlined it in hushed tones as they waited, the platoon hunkered in their slits, twigs snapping under boots, the distant rumble of engines echoing like thunder in the valley. Eddie monitored the fricks, static his constant companion, while Lena patched a kid's blistered feet 2 holes over. Tension coiled in the air, thick as the fog rolling down from the hills. A scout reported movement. German infantry probing, shadows detaching from the trees, their Mausers glinting faintly. At midnight, the plan cracked. The artillery barrage hit early, shells whistling overhead in a deafening crescendo, but it veered wide, smashing into the wrong ridge, lighting the night with orange blooms that revealed their positions instead of the enemy's. Shouts erupted from the German side. Machine guns chattered to life, tracers stitching the dark like fiery seams. "Incoming!" Roy bellowed, shoving Eddie down as bullets thwacked into the log. The radio sparked in Eddie's pack, a near miss shearing the antenna clean off. Chaos swallowed them, men scrambling, the air acrid with cordite and pine sap. Lena fired her carbine from the lip of her hole, her shots precise, dropping a silhouette that lunged too close. "They're flanking us! Roy, we gotta pull back!" Eddie clawed at the radio, stripping wires with numb fingers, desperate to call it in. Static only, the signal dead. The Panzer's growl grew louder, treads pulverizing the snow, and in that moment, the forest felt alive with malice, branches clawing at the sky as if urging the enemy on. Roy's face hardened, his decision quick. "Regroup at the stream bed. Eddie, get that thing working or we're blind." They retreated in bounds, fire and movement, the cold burning their lungs as they dragged wounded behind them. One man didn't make it. Private Klein, caught in the open, his cry cut short by a burst. The cost hit like a slap. Not just lives, but the illusion of control. The radios, their lifeline, had failed when it mattered most. And now the Germans were closing, incredulous whispers filtering through captured chatter about how the Americans seemed to know their every Lieutenant Harlan crouched in the shadow of a shattered hedgerow, the damp earth soaking through his fatigues like a persistent chill. The Normandy bocage stretched out before him, a maze of thick hedges and sunken lanes that turned every advance into a gamble. His squad, Ellis on the radio, Reyes scouting ahead, and young Whitaker hauling the extra ammo, huddled close, their breaths fogging in the pre-dawn mist. Harlan's fingers tightened around his carbine, the weight a familiar anchor. They were part of the 101st, pushing inland after D-Day, but the Krauts held the high ground like ticks on a dog. "Radio check," Harlan whispered, his voice rough from the smoke of yesterday's barrage. Ellis, the wiry kid from Brooklyn with a knack for wires, fiddled with the SCR 536's dials. The thing was a brick in his pack, but it linked them to battalion like an invisible thread. "This is Baker 3. Over." Static crackled. Then Captain Mallory's voice cut through, clipped and urgent from the command post 2 miles back. "Proceed to Objective Alpha. Flank the pillbox at Grid 47. Artillery support on your mark. Out." Harlan nodded, though no one could see it. The plan was simple. Slip through the lanes, signal for the big guns to soften the target, then close in. Reyes, ever the joker with his quick grin and sharper eyes, peered over the hedge. "Looks quiet, LT. Too quiet, like they're waiting for us to dance." "Save the poetry," Harlan muttered, but there was no bite in it. Reyes had pulled them out of a foxhole scrap last week with nothing but a grenade and guts. Whitaker, barely 20 in all farm boy earnestness, shifted his load, the crates clinking softly. "We moving, sir?" "Yeah. Single file, Ellis last. Keep that radio humming." They moved out, boots sinking into the mud of the lane. The air hung heavy with the scent of wet leaves and distant cordite. Harlan led, carbine at the ready, ears straining for the snap of twigs or the low rumble of a half-track. The hedgerow walls rose 8 feet high, roots clawing the earth like barriers from some ancient war. A lone apple tree arched overhead, its fruit bruised and fallen, a stark silhouette against the gray sky. Half a mile in, the lane forked. Reyes signaled left, his hand slicing the air. Harlan followed, heart steady but pulse quickening. That's when Ellis's voice hissed from behind. "LT, I've got interference, like someone's jamming us." Harlan froze, waving the others down. Jamming? The Germans had their tricks. Wireless detectors, even primitive direction finders, but this felt off. Too precise. Can you break through? Ellis knelt, antenna extended like a divining rod. His fingers danced over the knobs, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. Trying. It's faint, but it's there, like a whisper over the line. Reyes slid back, eyes scanning the flanks. Could be a spotter. MG nest up ahead? Before Harlan could respond, a burst of fire chewed the hedge to their right. Bullets whined, splintering wood and kicking up dirt. "Down!" Harlan yelled, diving into the base of the bank. Whitaker yelped, dropping the ammo and scrambling for cover. Reyes returned fire blindly, his Thompson chattering in short bursts. The ambush came from a concealed slit in the hedge, an MG-42 spitting lead at cyclic rate. Harlan's squad was pinned, the lane a kill zone. He crawled to Ellis, who was shielding the radio with his body. "Get through to battalion, we need that Artie now." Ellis thumbed the mic, voice steady amid the roar. "Baker 3 to command. Under fire at grid 46. Request immediate support. Over." Static answered, laced with that damn interference. A low hum, like German field phones crossed with their signal. Another burst raked the ground, inches from Harlan's boot. Whitaker was hit, a red bloom on his sleeve, but he clamped down, firing his Garand one-handed. "I'm okay, sir. Just grazed." Reyes flanked low, lobbing a grenade over the hedge. It exploded with a dull thump, screams following in German. The MG faltered, but not before a round clipped Reyes's helmet, spinning it off. He cursed in Spanish, grabbing it and firing again. That shut him up, but more coming. Harlan's mind raced. The plan, flank and call fire, had backfired hard. The jamming meant no Artie, no backup. They were isolated, the bocage swallowing sound and sight. A shadow moved on the lane ahead. More Krauts, closing from the fork. At least a platoon, their Feldgrau uniforms blending with the mist. "Regroup," Harlan barked. "Ellis, keep trying that radio. Reyes, Whitaker, cover me. We're pushing back to the fork." They fell back, leapfrogging under fire. Bullets snapped overhead, one grazing Harlan's pack. The radio hissed in Ellis's hands. Mallory's voice finally breaking through, faint as a ghost. "Baker 3, confirm position, support en route but you're jammed. Evade and report." Evade. Harlan gritted his teeth. No choice now. The squad burst through the fork, hedges tearing at their clothes, into a shallow orchard. Whitaker stumbled, blood soaking his arm, but Reyes hauled him up, slinging the kid's rifle over his shoulder. "Hang in, farm boy, ain't over yet." Behind them, the Germans shouted, boots pounding the lane. Harlan glanced back, a fleeting image of helmets bobbing, rifles glinting. The radios had guided them this far, but now they were a curse, drawing the enemy like moths. He led them deeper into the trees, the first light of dawn filtering through, casting long shadows that hid both friend and foe. The cost was already mounting. Whitaker's wound, the ammo lost in the mud. And the real fight, Harlan knew, was just beginning. Sergeant Ellis crouched behind the splintered trunk of a pine, his breath fogging in the chill dawn air. The Ardennes forest pressed in around him, branches heavy with frost that cracked like gunfire under the slightest shift. Beside him, Private Harlan fiddled with the radio pack, fingers numb as he twisted dials, static hissing like a cornered snake. Lieutenant Carver scanned the ridge ahead through binoculars, his jaws set in that familiar line of quiet determination. "Nothing yet," Carver murmured, lowering the glasses. "But Jerry's out there. I can feel it." Harlan nodded, not looking up. His hands, scarred from farm work back in Iowa, moved with the precision of someone who'd learned to fix tractors before he learned to shoot. The radio was their lifeline. A bulky SCR 536 that weighed like an anchor but whispered coordinates and orders from command. Ellis remembered the briefing. Every squad linked. No more running blind into ambushes. The Germans hadn't figured it out yet, or so the brass said. A twig snapped somewhere to their left. Ellis's hand went to his M1, heart thudding steady. "Harlan, kill that static. It's louder than a tank." "Working on it, Sarge." Harlan adjusted the antenna, a whip-thin rod that caught on low branches. The device had saved their hides twice already in this push through the bulge. Once by rerouting them around a minefield, another by calling in Artie on a pillbox. But batteries were finite, and the cold drained them faster than a leaky canteen. Carver folded the binoculars into his coat. "Plan's simple. We crest that ridge, link up with Baker Company. Radios first, confirm their position." He was the cautious one, always double-checking, his southern drawl softening the edges of command. Ellis appreciated it. Harlan's wit kept morale up, but Carver's steadiness glued them together. They moved out, boots crunching through snow that muffled the world to a white hush. Ellis took point, eyes darting to shadows where pines clumped like silent sentries. The air smelled of pine sap and cordite, a reminder of yesterday's skirmish. Harlan trailed, radio slung over his shoulder, the pack's leather straps biting into his wool jacket. Halfway up the slope, the radio crackled to life. "Eagle Nest, this is Hawk 1. Positions confirmed. Hostiles spotted, 2 clicks east. Adjust bearing 090. Harlan relayed it in a whisper, excitement edging his voice. "Baker's got eyes on Krauts. We're clear if we swing right." Ellis grinned faintly, the first real smile since Chow. "See? Told you that thing's magic." But Carver held up a fist, halting them. Through the trees, a glint. Metal, catching the weak sun. Not ours. He signaled down, and they dropped into a crouch as the rumble grew. Tracks, grinding over frozen earth. A Panzer IV lumbered into view, its turret swiveling lazily, flanked by a squad of gray uniforms probing the underbrush. The Germans moved with practiced caution, Mausers at the ready, their officer barking low orders in clipped tones. "Ambush," Ellis breathed. "How'd they get ahead?" Harlan's face paled under his helmet. "Radio must have glitched, or they jammed it." Carver's eyes narrowed. No time for blame. The tank's barrel depressed toward their position, treads churning snow into mud. One burst from its MG-42, and branches shredded above them, bark exploding in sharp bursts. "Flank left," Carver ordered, voice cutting through the din. Ellis fired first, his Garand barking twice. One German dropped, clutching his leg. Harlan swung the radio around, fumbling for the handset amid the chaos. "Panzer at grid." Static swallowed his words as bullets whined past, splintering wood. The tank's engine roared, closing the gap. Ellis rolled behind a boulder, popping up to snap shots that pinged off the Panzer's hull. Useless against armor, but it kept the infantry pinned. Carver grabbed Harlan's arm. "Forget calling it in. That antenna's a beacon. They're zeroing on the signal." Harlan's eyes widened. "But without it, we adapt." Carver unslung his Thompson, spraying the advancing squad. 2 more Germans fell, but the officer waved forward, grenades arcing through the air. Ellis lunged, tackling Harlan as the blasts erupted, earth fountaining around them. Shrapnel whistled, carving red lines across Carver's cheek. He wiped blood away, unfazed. "Radio's jammed or dead. We take that tank or we don't link up." The sergeant nodded, mind racing. The Panzer was 50 yards out, its MG chattering relentlessly. Harlan, coughing dirt, yanked the radio's battery pack free. "If I short this, maybe an EMP burst, disrupt their electrics?" Carver shook his head. "Too risky. We're not engineers." But Ellis saw it. Their only play. "Cover me. I'll plant a charge." As bullets stitched the snow, the 3 men surged forward in tandem, a desperate wedge against the gray tide. Sergeant Ellis wiped the sweat from his brow, the Normandy mud caking his boots like a second skin. The foxhole they dug hours ago was already half flooded from the relentless drizzle, and the air hung heavy with the scent of wet earth and cordite. Private Harlan crouched beside him, fiddling with the SCR 536 handheld radio, its leather case scarred from too many close calls. Harlan was the wiry one, all nerves and quick fingers, The kind of kid who could coax a signal out of static if you gave him a prayer. "Still nothing?" Ellis asked, keeping his voice low. The ridge ahead was a jagged line of hedgerows and shattered trees, German positions hidden like ghosts in the mist. Harlan shook his head, twisting the dial. "Fuzz and whispers, Sarge, but I swear, that last burst from battalion was clear as day. Hold the line, reinforcements inbound. If the Krauts are jamming us, they're doing a piss-poor job." Corporal Reyes, leaning against the opposite wall of the hole, spat into the muck. He was the steady one, broad-shouldered with a scar across his cheek from Anzio, always the first to volunteer for patrol. "Jamming or not, those bastards know we're pinned. Saw their MG nests moving up at dusk. If we don't get that arty call through, we're sitting ducks come morning." Ellis nodded, peering through the slit in their camouflage netting. The company had pushed too far the day before, radios guiding them through the bocage like invisible threads. Coordinates whispered from command, adjusting fire on the fly. It had caught the Germans off guard at first, their counterattacks scattering under precise barrages. But now, with the storm rolling in, the signals were fading, and doubt crept in like the chill. "All right," Ellis said, slinging his Thompson over his shoulder. "Harlan, you stay put and keep trying. Reyes, you're with me. We need eyes on that ridge. Find a spot to relay if the radio craps out." Reyes grinned faintly, checking his Garand. "Scouting in this soup. You're buying the first round in Paris if we make it." They slipped out under the cover of darkness, bellies low to the ground, the rain masking their steps. The field was a maze of sunken lanes and thick hedges, each turn a potential ambush. Ellis led, memory guiding him from the maps they'd studied by flashlight. Radio intel marking enemy outposts, weak points in their lines. Without it, they were blind. Half a mile in, the terrain dipped into a shallow valley, and that's when they heard it. The low rumble of engines, not American. Panzers, or at least half-tracks, grinding through the mud toward the ridge. Ellis signaled halt, dropping behind a splintered oak. Through the downpour, he made out shadows. German infantry dismounting, their silhouettes sharp against the faint glow of a flare somewhere behind the lines. Reyes whispered, "That's a company at least, moving to flank us." Ellis's mind raced. The radios had been their edge, turning chaos into coordination. But now, he pulled a field phone from his pack, a backup wired to the company line if they could reach it, but the cord was useless in open ground. "We get closer, spot their command post. Harlan can patch through if we give him cords." They crept forward, hearts pounding in sync with the thunder. A patrol brushed past, mere yards away, their voices guttural murmurs in the rain. Ellis held his breath, mud seeping into his collar. One wrong move, and it was over. By dawn's gray light, they crested a low rise overlooking the German buildup. Tents huddled under ponchos, radios of their own crackling faintly. Older models, bulky few G sets that the Yanks had long outpaced. Reyes pointed to a staff car, an officer barking orders, maps spread on the hood. "There," Ellis murmured. "That's our target. Take him out, and they're push stalls." But as Reyes sighted his rifle, a burst of static crackled from Ellis's pocket, his own radio, left on low. The Germans froze, heads snapping toward the sound. A shout, then gunfire stitching the hedge. "Run!" Ellis yelled, shoving Reyes down the slope. Bullets whipped past, tearing leaves and bark. They bolted through the underbrush, legs burning, the valley alive with pursuit. Back at the foxhole, Harlan was on his feet when they tumbled in, soaked and gasping. "Sarge, I got it. Signal's breaking through. Battalion's got our position." Ellis collapsed against the wall, chest heaving. "Good. Call it in. But those Krauts are coming fast. Tell them we need everything they've got." As Harlan keyed the mic, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. The first shells whistled overhead. The ground shook with impacts, but not all were theirs. German artillery answered, walking fire toward their lines. Reyes reloaded, face grim. That officer saw us. They're not waiting for dawn. The radio hissed back. Coordinates confirmed, barrage incoming. But in the chaos, Ellis wondered if the Germans had pieced it together yet. The invisible web of voices guiding every move, turning their rigid plans to dust. One more push, and maybe they'd break through. Or maybe the mud and rain would claim them first. Harlan's transmission cut short as a near miss caved in part of the foxhole, dirt raining down. "Lost it!" he shouted, scrambling to adjust. Ellis grabbed his arm. "Keep trying, we're not done yet." The battle raged on, a symphony of explosions and cries, the radios their fragile lifeline in the storm. The fog clung to the Ardennes like a shroud, muting the crunch of boots on frozen earth. Lieutenant Harris crouched behind a splintered oak, his breath fogging the air as he adjusted the strap of his SCR 536 radio. The set was lighter than the old days, a handheld miracle that fit in his palm, but its batteries were whining now, a faint hum that set his teeth on edge. "Ramirez, you read me?" he whispered into the mouthpiece, keeping his voice low. The static crackled back, then cleared. "Loud and clear, sir. But if this fog doesn't lift, we're flying blind. Ellis says he spotted movement up the ridge, could be Kraut setting up mortars." Harris glanced back at the squad. Private Ellis huddled against a log, his M1 Garand clutched like a lifeline, eyes darting through the mist. The kid was 19, all nerves and caution, but his hawk-eyed scouting had saved their hides twice already. Sergeant Ramirez fiddled with his own radio pack, his fingers nimble despite the cold. A wry smile cracking his chapped lips. "Told you the batteries were on their last legs. One more transmission like that artillery call-in yesterday, and we're back to semaphore flags." "Save the jokes," Harris muttered, though he felt the pull of Ramirez's humor. It kept the fear at bay. They were pushing toward the Roer River, part of the broader offensive to crack the Siegfried line. But this stretch of woods was a death trap. Intelligence said the Germans were hunkered down, their lines ragged after Bastogne. But Harris knew better than to trust maps alone. The radios had been their edge, whispering coordinates to the big guns miles back, turning ambushes into routes. The Jerrys hadn't figured it out yet. Their intercepts were all frantic guesses. No pattern to the ghost strikes. "Plan simple," Harris said, tracing a finger in the frost-dusted dirt. "We flank left, up the draw. Ellis scouts ahead, Ramirez on overwatch with the radio. If we hit resistance, call it in. Artillery support's cued if we can punch the signal through." He met their eyes, steady. Brave wasn't bravado. It was this, the quiet nod before the push. Ellis swallowed hard, his face pale under the helmet rim. "Sir, that ridge is steep. Fog's thick. Might walk right into 'em." Ramirez clapped the kid's shoulder. "That's why your point, Ellis. Your eyes are better than any radar. Just don't trip over a root and broadcast our position." They moved out, single file, the forest swallowing their shadows. The air smelled of pine and cordite, a bitter mix that reminded Harris of the Hurtgen weeks back, where the trees themselves seemed to fight you. His boots sank into the mud, each step a calculated risk. The radio bounced against his hip, a reassuring weight. Until it wasn't. Halfway up the draw, Ellis froze, raising a fist. Harris dropped low, heart thudding. Through the haze, shapes flickered. Not deer, not wind-stirred branches. German voices, guttural and close, carried on the damp air. "Patrol," Ellis breathed. "Maybe 6, with a MG-42. Harris's mind raced. The original plan had banked on surprise, slipping past to the high ground for a clear shot at the river crossing. But this was no loose picket. They were dug in. The chatter of their field phone audible now, linking back to command. "Radio check," he hissed to Ramirez. The sergeant thumbed the set, but the response was garbled static, then nothing. "Battery's dead, sir. Must have drained on that last ping." "Damn it!" Harris gripped his Thompson submachine gun, the metal cold as the knot in his gut. No call for support meant no barrage to soften them up. They were on their own. 3 against a nest that could chew through a platoon. Ellis's eyes widened, caution turning to outright fear, but he didn't bolt. Kid was learning. New play, Harris decided, voice low steel. We don't flank, we draw 'em out. Ellis, circle wide and toss a grenade their way. Noise only, no frag. Ramirez, you and me hit from the sides once they're spooked. Make it quick. Ramirez nodded, his wit subdued now, replaced by the sharp focus of a man who'd lost friends to hesitation. Like that time in Sicily, worked then till it didn't. It will. Harris hoped it sounded convincing. They split, Ellis vanishing into the underbrush like a ghost. Minutes stretched, the fog pressing in, until a sharp crack echoed. A grenade pin pulled, the dull thump of it rolling harmlessly into their lines. Shouts erupted, German boots pounding toward the sound. Harris sprang, Ramirez mirroring on the right. Bullets whined through the trees, stitching bark into confetti, but the radio's absence bit deepest. No warning to the rest of the company. No coordinated punch. He squeezed the trigger, the Thompson barking short bursts, dropping the lead scout in a crumple of felled growl. Ramirez's Garand cracked twice, precise, felling another. But the MG-42 roared to life, its hateful chatter pinning them behind a boulder. Ellis scrambled back, face smeared with mud, gasping. They're calling reinforcements. Heard the phone. 1 down, 5 to go, and the odds tilting fast. Harris's shoulder burned where a ricochet had grazed him, warm blood soaking his sleeve. The plan had backfired, turning stealth into a firefight, and now the forest echoed with the cost. Ramirez reloaded, cursing softly in Spanish, while Ellis covered fire, his shots wild but determined. In the lull, a German voice barked orders, closer than before. Harris risked a peek. They were advancing, cautious but closing the noose. No radios, no escape, but maybe adaptation. Ellis, he whispered, your bayonet. Ramirez, cover me. We're going hand to hand if we have to. The kid nodded, steeling himself, as the shadows in the fog grew longer, hungrier. The ridge waited beyond, the river beyond that, but first, survival. Raw, unscripted, the human edge no machine could replace. Sergeant Hale crouched behind the splintered trunk of an oak, his breath steady despite the mud caking his boots and the distant rumble of artillery that never quite faded. The forest edge blurred into the open fields of the Hurtgen, where the pines stood like silent sentinels, their needles whispering in the chill wind. Private Ellis, the radio man, fiddled with the SCR 300's dials, his fingers blackened from grease and cold. Signal's holding, Sarge, he murmured, eyes fixed on the glowing tube. Command's patching through coordinates. Looks like Jerry's got a fallback line 2 clicks east. Corporal Ruiz, ever the skeptic, spat into the dirt and adjusted his helmet strap. Fallback or trap? We've been chasing ghosts since the river. Last push nearly got us pinned. His voice carried that low rumble, honed from years in the barrios before the draft pulled him north. He scanned the tree line, rifle balanced across his knees, while Private Lang, the kid from Brooklyn with a quick grin, leaned against a root, sketching idle lines in the soil with his bayonet. Ghosts or not, these walkie-talkies are gold. Remember, Aachen? We flanked 'em blind because of this chatter. Jerry's probably think we're mind readers. Hale nodded, but his mind raced ahead. The radio had been their edge since Normandy. Short-range sets linking squads like invisible threads, turning scattered GIs into a coordinated fist. Command fed them real-time intel, enemy movements, supply dumps, even weather shifts that could turn the mud to glue. It baffled the Germans, who'd relied on runners and fixed wires, vulnerable to shell fire. But here in the Hurtgen's meat grinder, the forest choked signals, and every transmission risked a fix from some Wehrmacht listener. The stakes weren't abstract. Last week, a platoon vanished after a burst of static gave them away. Plan simple, Hale said, keeping his tone even, like he was calling a baseball pitch. We skirt the ridge, link with Baker Company at the crossroads. Radios guide us wide of the minefield. Ellis, you call the shots. Ruiz, you take point. Lang, cover our 6. No one argued. They'd learned trust the hard way, after the botched crossing where Ruiz's caution saved them from a sniper's nest. Hale's bravery was quieter, the kind that pushed men forward without flash. They moved out at dusk, shadows merging with the underbrush. Ellis trailed, backpack radio humming softly, its antenna swaying like a divining rod. The air smelled of damp earth and pine sap, undercut by the faint rot of unburied dead. Ruiz led with deliberate steps, probing the ground with his rifle barrel, his broad shoulders cutting a path through ferns. "Quiet now," he whispered as they crested a shallow rise. Below, the valley floor stretched, pocked with craters from the morning barrage. Hale's map marked it clear, but the radio crackled. "Eagle Nest, this is Hawk. Adjust bearing 270. Hostiles massing at grid 4722, flank left." Ellis relayed it in a hushed tone, and they veered west, boots sinking into loam. Lang muttered a joke about German beer to ease the knot in his gut, but it fell flat. Tension coiled like a spring. The Hurtgen wasn't a battlefield. It was a beast, swallowing divisions whole with its fog and hidden draws. Hale felt the weight of his Thompson submachine gun, its stock worn smooth from drills. He'd seen too many boys like Lang go quiet under that pressure, their wit cracking into silence. Half a click in, the plan frayed. A snap echoed, branch or tripwire, and Ruiz froze, signaling halt. "Contact," he hissed. Through the gloom, shapes stirred, not shadows, but men. German patrols, 5 or 6, probing the same ridge. Their Feldgrau uniforms blended with the twilight, Mausers glinting faintly. Hale's heart thudded. Radios couldn't dodge eyes. "Down!" he ordered, dropping prone. Ellis killed the set's volume, but the damage was done. Their movement had spooked the enemy. The Germans fanned out, voices low in guttural tones, lanterns flickering like fireflies. One called coordinates, mimicking their own lingo. Had they intercepted scraps? Ruiz's eyes met Hale's, a silent debate. Fight or fade? Lang's breath came quick, his bayonet trembling slightly. "We circle back?" he whispered. But Hale shook his head. Baker Company waited. Delay meant isolation, and the forest's chill promised exposure by dawn. Mines, patrols, the endless rain. It all pressed in, a cost measured in frost-bitten toes and missing buddies. "Suppress and slip," Hale decided, voice a thread. Ruiz nodded, grim, and they crawled left, using roots for cover. A shot cracked, warning fire, and dirt sprayed. Lang returned it, his Garand barking once, twice, pinning the nearest Fritz. Ellis dragged the radio, whispering updates. "Hawk, we've got tangos. Request air?" Static answered, then denial. "Too close. Risk to friendlies." The Germans advanced, methodical, their officer barking orders. One bullet whined past Hale's ear, splintering bark. Ruiz flanked right, a ghost in the ferns, his caution turning predator. He loosed a grenade, the blast blooming orange, scattering 2 foes in screams. Hale and Lang poured fire, short bursts to conserve ammo. The air thickened with cordite and cries. Human costs laid bare. No heroes, just survival. A German fell clutching his leg, his face pale under the helmet, eyes wide with the same fear Lang hid behind quips. They broke contact, melting into the draw as the patrol regrouped. Ellis's radio sparked life. "Bearing clear now, push to rally." But Ruiz limped, shrapnel grazing his calf, blood soaking his puttee. Hale tore a strip from his own shirt to bind it, the metallic tang sharp on his tongue. "You good?" Ruiz grunted affirmation, but the wound slowed them, a lingering drag. Lang helped, his wit subdued, sketching no more lines in the dirt. By midnight they reached the crossroads, Baker's silhouettes a welcome blur. Handshakes were brief, nods heavier. The radios had guided them through, but the forest exacted its toll. Ruiz's limp, the echo of that dying German's gasp. Hale stared into the dark, wondering how many more edges their invisible threads could weave before they snapped. The war's moral haze settled, not in speeches, but in the ache of choices. The snow had turned the forest floor into a treacherous sheet of white, muffling the crunch of boots but amplifying every snapped twig like a gunshot. Private Ellis hunched over the radio pack, his gloved fingers fumbling with the dials in the dim light filtering through the pines. The static hissed like an angry serpent, unbroken for the last hour. "Come on, you bastard," he muttered, twisting the antenna higher. Beside him, Sergeant Hale scanned the tree line with his binoculars, his breath fogging the air in sharp bursts. The ridge ahead loomed, a jagged scar against the gray sky, where the German outpost waited like a coiled spring. They'd pushed too far. Hale knew that now. The initial plan, slip in under cover of the blizzard, use the radio to call in coordinates for the artillery barrage, had unraveled when the storm knocked out half their signal relays. Lieutenant Carver was back at the forward line, probably pacing a hole in the snow, waiting for their ping. But Hale couldn't turn back, not with the intel on that supply depot burning a hole in his map. "Ellis, anything?" he whispered, lowering the binoculars. His voice carried the weight of a man who'd seen too many good plans die in the mud. Ellis shook his head, the cold biting into his cheeks until they burned red. He was the cautious one, always double-checking the frequencies before transmission. The kid from Brooklyn who'd enlisted thinking radios were just fancy telephones. Now, it felt like whispering to ghosts. "Nothing, Sarge. Interference is too thick. If I boost the power, they might triangulate us." He paused, eyes flicking to the compass. The needle trembled, as if the earth itself was undecided. Hale crouched lower, the memory of the last patrol gnawing at him. 3 men lost to a sniper's nest because the radio had gone silent at the worst moment. A faint crackle broke the static, like ice shifting on a frozen river. Ellis's heart jumped. He leaned in, adjusting the gain. Voices emerged, fragmented but clear enough. German, clipped and urgent. "Amerikaner, position!" Hale's hand shot out, gripping Ellis's shoulder. "Shut it down," he hissed, but it was too late. The voices sharpened, coordinates spitting out in bursts. They were listening. The Germans had cracked the frequency, or worse, jammed it with their own counterfeit signal. Hale yanked the radio from Ellis's back, slamming the power switch. The forest seemed to hold its breath. "We move, now!" He slung the pack over his own shoulder, heavier than sin, and nodded toward the ridge's flank. Ellis grabbed his rifle, the metal cold against his palm, and followed, his mind racing through fallback codes they'd drilled 100 times. But doubt crept in. What if Carver heard the wrong signal? What if the barrage hit their own position? They crept uphill, the slope steepening until roots snagged at their boots like skeletal fingers. Hale led, his brave streak shining through in the steady rhythm of his steps. But Ellis saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his free hand never strayed far from the grenade pouch. Halfway up, a shadow flickered in the underbrush, a patrol, 2 Germans sweeping the edge with bayonets fixed. Hale dropped to a knee, signaling halt. Ellis froze, pulse thundering in his ears. The Germans paused, one lighting a cigarette, the flame a brief orange bloom in the gloom. Hale's eyes met Ellis's, a silent question passing between them. "Talk or fight?" Ellis mouthed, "Wait," his cautious nature urging patience, but Hale shook his head. In a fluid motion, he unslung the radio pack and wedged it against a tree trunk, then pulled a wire from his pocket, the emergency booster line, meant for dire straits. "Cover me," he whispered, crawling forward on his belly. Ellis aimed his rifle, the sight blurring slightly from the cold sweat on his brow. Hale inched closer, heart pounding against the snow-dampened wool of his jacket. 20 yards. The Germans laughed at something, voices low and weary, human in a way that twisted Hale's gut. He reached the pack's external port, splicing the wire with numb fingers. A spark jumped, faint but alive. If he could reroute the signal through the backup crystal, maybe punch through the jam. A twig snapped under Ellis's boot. The Germans whirled, rifles snapping up. Time fractured. Hale rolled behind a boulder as the first shot splintered bark inches from his head. Ellis fired from the hip, the recoil jarring his shoulder, and one German staggered back, clutching his thigh. The second returned fire, bullets whining through the trees like vengeful hornets. "Sarge!" Ellis yelled, diving for cover, his world narrowing to the acrid sting of cordite and the metallic tang of fear. Hale finished the splice, the radio humming to life in his hands. He keyed the mic, voice steady despite the chaos. "Eagle 1 to base, coordinates 4722 north, 1015 east, authenticate Delta Foxtrot 9, fire mission, over." Static, then a burst. "Base to Eagle 1, authenticate confirmed, shells inbound, 10 mics, hold position." The wounded German crawled toward them, moaning, while his comrade flanked wide, using the pines for cover. Ellis popped up, squeezing off rounds that kicked up snow in puffs. Hale joined him, the two of them laying down suppressing fire, backs against the boulder. "They're closing!" Ellis shouted, reloading with shaking hands. Hale nodded, his mind flashing to the men they'd lost before. Good soldiers, reduced to names on a telegram. Minutes stretched like taffy. The Germans pinned them, grenades arcing through the air. One exploded nearby, showering them with dirt and shrapnel. Ellis felt a sting across his arm, warm blood seeping through his sleeve. Hale lobbed his own grenade, the blast scattering the enemy but not ending them. "Hang on, kid," Hale grunted, wiping mud from his face. The air vibrated then, a low rumble growing to thunder. Artillery. Shells screamed overhead, slamming into the ridge with earth-shaking fury. The ground bucked, trees toppling like dominoes, and the Germans' cries cut short amid the roar. Hale pulled Ellis down as debris rained, the world a maelstrom of fire and smoke. When it cleared, the outpost was a smoldering crater, the supply depot's promise of victory reduced to twisted metal and silence. They staggered to their feet, the radio pack smoking but intact. Ellis pressed to the dawn broke gray and unforgiving over the Ardennes, the kind of light that seeped into bones like damp rot. Sergeant Elias Kane crouched behind a shattered pine, his Thompson submachine gun cradled like a sleeping child, its barrel still warm from the night's skirmishes. The air hummed with the low chatter of radios, those damn SCR 536 that had turned the tide in ways the Krauts could never fathom. Elias thumbed the switch on his own set, the voice of Lieutenant Harlan Voss crackling through. "Elias, hold the ridge. Reinforcements inbound, but Jerry's probing east. Stay sharp." Elias nodded to himself, though no one could see. Sharp. They'd been sharp for weeks now, ever since the push through the Hurtgen forest, where the trees themselves seemed to conspire with the enemy. His squad, what was left of it, huddled nearby. Private Tommy Ruiz, the wiry kid from Brooklyn with a knack for splicing wires under fire, and Corporal Lena Marek, the Polish-American medic who'd patched more boys than she could count without her hands shaking. 4 of them now, down from 12 when they crossed the Rhine. The others were ghosts in the mud, their stories ending in foxholes or hedgerows. "Tommy, eyes on that tree line," Elias murmured, his voice a gravel whisper honed by too many patrols. The kid adjusted his helmet, peering through the mist with binoculars scavenged from a dead Oberleutnant. Lena knelt beside a wounded man. Private Greer, leg shredded by shrapnel the day before. Her morphine syringe glinting as she administered another dose. "Hang in there, soldier," she said, her accent clipping the words like shears. Greer groaned, eyes glassy, but he managed a thumbs up. Real cost, Elias thought. Every bullet, every bandage, carved from their own dwindling supplies. The radios had been their lifeline, those handheld miracles broadcasting coordinates, warnings, even morale boosts from command. The Germans had captured a few, puzzled over them like alien artifacts, whispering about how every Yankee seemed to know their moves before they made them. Elias remembered the interrogation report from Division. A captured SS officer ranting about Teufel devil signals, guiding invisible hands. It wasn't magic. It was frequency modulation, crystal sets tuned to channels the enemy couldn't jam without half their spectrum. But today, with the battery low and the antenna frayed, Elias felt the weight of it all pressing down. A rustle in the underbrush snapped him alert. Tommy froze, then hissed, "Movement, Sarge. 5 shadows, closing from the north." Elias raised his fist, signaling silence. The squad melted lower, hearts pounding in rhythm with the distant rumble of artillery. Lena finished with Greer, slinging her pack and drawing her M1 carbine, her face set like flint. She'd lost her brother to the Blitz back in '40. Vengeance wasn't her style, but survival was. The first German emerged from the fog, a Wehrmacht infantryman in a tattered Feldgrau coat, MP40 at the ready. He froze, spotting the glint of Tommy's binoculars. Shouts erupted in guttural bursts. "Amerikaner! Feuer!" And the world exploded into lead. Elias squeezed the trigger, short bursts stitching the air, dropping the lead man in a crumple of limbs. Tommy's Garand barked next, cracking like thunder, while Lena picked her shots deliberate, conserving ammo for the medic's load. They fell back, using the radio's last juice. "Voss, this is Kane. Enemy contact on Ridge Alpha, 5+, request immediate." Static swallowed the rest as a bullet whined past, splintering bark. The set went dead, screen flickering out like a snuffed candle. No guidance now. Just them. The Germans pressed, grenades arcing through the mist like fiery comets. One landed short, showering dirt. Another too close, blasting Tommy off his feet with a cry. Elias dragged him behind cover, blood blooming on the kid's shoulder. "Not today," he growled, tying a tourniquet with practiced fury. Lena was there in seconds, staunching the flow, her hands steady even as bullets chipped the rock around them. "Flank 'em," Elias decided, the words tasting like ash. No clever tech fix this time. No radio to call in the big guns. It was down to wits and will. He nodded to Lena, who understood instantly. She'd seen enough charges to know the rhythm. They waited for the lull, then bolted left, circling through a ravine slick with runoff. Tommy, pale but game, covered from the hole, popping shots to draw fire. The Germans adapted quick. Veterans, these ones, not green replacements. A machine gun nested in the pines, chattering death. Elias lobbed his last grenade, the blast ripping branches and silencing it for a breath. They closed the gap, bayonets fixed, the air thick with cordite and sweat. Up close, the enemy faces were weary mirrors. Hollow cheeks, eyes haunted by the same endless slog. Lena struck first, her carbine butt cracking a helmet, sending the man sprawling. Elias followed, wrestling another to the ground, fists and elbows until the fight ebbed. Tommy's voice yelled from afar, "Clear on my side!" And then Voss's platoon crested the rise, rifles blazing, the reinforcements finally through the snarl of roads. By midday, the ridge held. The surviving Germans surrendered, hands high, one clutching a captured radio like a talisman, muttering in disbelief. Every soldier, guided. "How?" Elias didn't answer. He was too busy helping Lena bind Tommy's wound, the kid cracking a weak joke about Brooklyn delis to lighten the load. They buried Greer that afternoon under a makeshift cross of pine branches, the wind whispering through the trees like a reluctant eulogy. The radios would be resupplied, the signals would flow again, but the cost lingered. A squad halved, a friend silenced. Elias stared at the horizon, where more ridges waited, more shadows in the mist. Courage wasn't the charge or the kill. It was the quiet choice to keep moving, radio or no. And in the Ardennes' chill embrace, they moved on.